when Caitlin asked me to speak about transhumanism, I have to admit the first thing I did was say, yes, I'd be super honored, it'd be incredible. And then I went straight to Google and figured out what transhumanism meant. This is what I found. The transformation of the human condition through technologies that enhance human intellect and physiology. I added the last part, the human frontier. Right? To me, the big question is, how do we define technology? You know, what is that? I've had the honor of traveling around the world over the last decade with explorers and doing my research, working with the National Geographic Channel as well, going to places like the Holy Lands. I was here just a couple of weeks ago in Jordan, where the Earth's crust is literally ripping itself apart. It's in a place where the three monotheistic religions of our world were born. I've spent a lot of time lately in the jungles of Guatemala, in the caves of Mexico, looking face to face with a history of ours, that seems yet so alien. A people that understood the concept of time differently than we did. I've traveled through the lands of Asia, China, Mongolia, and other places, looking at the wonder, the ability of the human mind to imagine entire worlds and then turn them into reality. And all through that time, I've found that these artifacts, these technologies, maybe, of us, they're these mirrors of who we are, maybe where we're going. It kind of dawned on me. The question I kept on feeling was, is it that the technologies create us, maybe, as much as we create them? They lead us into these new ideas of who we are. You know, through this whole process over the last decade, things got really personal for me on this transformation quest, this quest to understand the human condition. I ended up, as many of you know, 2 years ago, lying in the dirt, crushed under the weight of a vehicle. You know, the blood pumping through my skull as I looked down and I saw that I had been transformed. It was the moment of my death and my rebirth. Now, some would say it's tragic, but it's not all bad. There's a lot of perks. For example, I will forever have the best Halloween costume for the rest of my life. Haha. It's like, nailed it. But thanks to technology, I've been able to move on, to get around, to live a life that's full, to have mobility, to be anything I want to be. And I realized that I joined a community of 40 million other amputees in the world. 40 million. And as I walked through the world, I realized that many of those, in fact, 95% of those people remain without prosthetics because it's incredibly hard to make. You have to spend months shaping the part of your body just right so that it fits exactly right. So one project I've been working on has been thinking about how do we transform that? How do we change that game? We took technologies, that Aaron was talking about earlier, things like photogrammetry, structure from light, and we've started coming up with ideas of how we could use cell phones to be able to map human bodies so that we could turn plastics, maybe wasted plastics, into something that could transform the lives of millions, giving them their lives back. We've just printed out our first couple of legs. It's cost us less than $10. But more importantly than that, you don't have to travel anywhere to get this thing made. You could just walk by somebody, you have a cell phone, and you can change their lives. But this is for a different time. I wanted to talk to you guys about something a little bit weirder. What's going on there? Right after I got into this new body, something really strange started happening. I started to feel intense pain in a part of my body that literally didn't exist anymore. I can tell you right now, I can feel my toes. I'm wiggling them. I'm not kidding. these questions of where does the body end and where does the mind begin? What is the mind? What is the body? I started working with this neuroscientist. Some of you might know the name V.S. Ramachandran. He discovered this thing called mirror therapy, where he could create a new story for my mind, a story that I could see and try to trick my brain into letting go of that pain. But every time he would remove the mirror, pain would rush back. I needed more than the story alone. We started looking at all the other kinds of research that was being done in the world around this idea of remapping your brain, remapping your mind. Your mind has a map of the body, the same way your mind has a map of the world and your role in the world. And I had to remap my mind. We started looking at the technology that was being used in places like depression research. The cutting edge of depression research right now is psychedelics. Johns Hopkins is leading this huge study right now on the power of psilocybin. So we tried this, among other things. We looked for ways in which I could get to that psychedelic state, to that trance state. We started thinking about meditation, about breathing, about yoga. Kundalini yoga, which is in ancient Sanskrit, is written as a technology between mind and body. What really worked? Psilocybin. In a single moment, within 30 minutes, the pain was gone forever. Ramachandran and I just published this case study, and we're looking at doing clinical trials here. But it's not like this is just the only way. The psilocybin, this psychedelic state, that was a shortcut. And everywhere I've gone throughout my entire journey has shown me that that shortcut has existed in other forms to these hypnotic states, to these trance states, through all culture. Why do these guys spin around in circles until they enter a trance state? I don't know. I play a lot of music. Imagine that feeling that violinist has right there in that moment. I went to India, to Varanasi, where I spent a week embedded with this gang of thieves, going into every temple I could find, beating the drums of these holy men until my hands bled. I spent a lot of time with music. I started thinking about it as a technologist, as an engineer. What can I do? Can I start measuring things like my heart rate variability, things like my EEG sensing, my body, what's happening to my body when I'm in these states of flow, in these states of transcendence? What is happening in those moments of transcendence that actually allows me to imagine a new reality and then hold it, to bend the spoon in my mind? We started playing around with other sensors. Can we start looking at those whirling dervishes and design experiments that measure their movement and then create these visual feedback loops so they can see these movements and start to feed off each other, pulling each other into these deeper states of flow? Possibly. These dots are visualizations of their movements in real time with the added intensity of their EEGs. I only have 5 minutes and I went over already, but I want to... Sorry, and there's beer outside. I've been told many times, don't stop people from drinking. It's over there. You're stopping them by going over. But I want to end with one really important story, which is maybe the beginning of my journey. It all started with Genghis Khan for me, as many of you might know. Genghis Khan, a person who had nothing, and in a single moment somehow transformed his understanding of his reality, of his mind, and created the largest human empire in human history. From what? How did he get to that state where he could reimagine a new reality? This is a really important story for me because I think this is at the core of the human condition. How do we choose to imagine new realities in this moment of great imbalance? In the final expedition of that project, 7 shamans showed up on the side of this mountain unexpectedly. It's in the middle of the most remote area I've ever been in my life. And they asked to see me at sundown. I just want to take you there just to feel what they did, because they took themselves into a trance. We met in front of this shrine. This is a recording I made in real time of their drums. Feel those drums. What's happening there? The shaman stood over me, beating this drum over my head as I knelt on the ground. I've played these drums all over the world. this recording, places like Africa, where people came up to me afterwards and said, these sound like our drums. Why are there drums everywhere? Why is there that rhythm, our heartbeat, that exists in these different states, these rituals of transformation? The shaman stood over me as he beat this drum. And I knelt there, under him. He brought himself into this moment where he was literally going to become another identity. In his mind, he was going to take on the spirit of his ancestor. And as that drum beat faster, beat over my head, pulling us both into this immersive state, into this state that was so overwhelming that I had to lose my ego, an ego death moment, where literally in that moment, I lost myself to the heartbeat of this drum. And then all of a sudden, it climaxed in this massive explosion of sound, of energy, of noise, of movement. And then he fell. And he fell to the ground. And he sat there. He was no longer human. He twitched like a bird. And he started, through these moments, trying to understand something, see something in my soul. I brought you to this feeling, to this moment of transcendence for me that was so powerful, because in this moment in time, where we collectively must imagine into reality a better future, we must listen to our heartbeat. We must rally our heartbeat to that moment of transcendence, to that moment of transformation, where we lose our egos and we create the human frontier. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Albert Lin, and I'm here to talk about where the diversity in cultures really come from. You know, I've had the honor of traveling the world from jungle to jungle, from desert to desert, from mountain to mountain, and I think the thing that really gets me is the enigma of what are the origins in imagination. And I was there with these two archaeologists, Dr. Francesco Stradiballi and the site director, Sandra Balanzario. And what they've been doing there for the last couple of years has been pretty remarkable. Finding things within these pyramids that you wouldn't quite expect, that might shift your understanding of how a civilization like the Maya might have operated. They let me go into the top of this pyramid. There's only 2 pyramids that have been found so far which have ancient Maya channels that enter in through the top of these pyramids. And when you pull back the little grate at the top, you end up going down deeper into, they send you down into this hole. And as I'm descending into the hole, Francisco mentions that there's not so many pleasant things down there, possibly, just to watch out for the possibility of a fer-de-lance snake, because they hadn't been in there in about a year. Does anybody know about the fer-de-lance snake? You've got a 50-50 chance of living even with the antivenom. And they try not to give it to you because the antivenom itself is sometimes more dangerous than the bite. So it's not good. As we're heading in, this is what it sort of feels like.
That's like a mini whip scorpion. I'm coming.
This is my sound recordist, Simon, who's going further and further into the channel as we're descending down ancient Mayan staircases. And if you could hear what he's saying, he's identifying a mini whip scorpion. Oh, good, right? This is what I feel like.
No, okay. It's got to be down there somewhere, or on the camera. Just seriously, turn the camera around to me, just slowly.
There's a scorpion issue going on. We're trying to clear deep in the heart of a burial chamber, and the other challenge is that we all had been through the last 3 days, as we're in Mexico. So in the hottest, muggiest place I've ever been, everyone's farting. Scorpions and farts. Awesome.
That's exploration, right? Yeah, no. I mean, it was rough. You're down in a tiny little cramped corner, and all of a sudden you're sitting there face to face with the ancient chamber of a queen's burial. surrounded by scorpions, of course. But it's remarkable the feeling you get when you're just past the veil, when you're there in a moment where you feel like you're touching something sacred at the very limits of human imagination. We were using technology like LiDAR, interior LiDAR, to try to scan the inside of those chambers and then come out and build a 3D model where you can imprint the interior structure of the pyramid inside the exterior model that we've created and try to see whether or not we've hit bedrock. And we hadn't, which means that there might be another tomb further down beneath. And then that was maybe, I think, less than 3 weeks ago that I left there, and then I headed off to Peru. So just last week, I was at a site that's called Chan Chan, which means sun. It's on the coast of Peru, in a desert. It's a remarkable place. They think it's actually one of the largest adobe cities, or cities in general, in the pre-Columbian world. And it's just this place that sort of has melted away over time, but once housed a vast empire before the Inca. And I was there, and this time was something like around, I think it started around 850 AD and got to right before the Spaniards arrived, and then the Inca took it out. But at its height, it had 40 to 60,000 people in it. And at that time, that was more than were here in London at the time. So when you go around and you walk through those city halls, you start to feel something. You start to see this sort of image of what daily life might have been like. What are those weird little things down there? They're not fish. They're actually, they explained to me that they're images of little pelicans. You can see the nose sticking out and the eye in the middle, in these very kind of strange shapes. And then the walls have just sort of crumbled away with the rains. Right outside of Chan Chan, which is supposedly the 6th driest city in the world, or near there, the neighboring city, is something quite gruesome, actually. The world there was one that was imagined out of a connection to the natural world. Everything was about the natural world, right? They're living in an incredibly arid, dry place. There's these really intense anomalies, these possible rains. Everything is based off of their understanding of their relationship to what's happening around them. They're using what they see around them to try to connect to nature. There's a deep culture that was based and still is based in using plant medicines to try to connect to the spirits of the natural world. Plants like San Pedro cactus, which is a entheogen, a term that's been coined by a group of people, maybe not more than 20 or 30 years ago, Carl Ruck and others from Brown, to describe the cultural use through time of hallucinogenic plants, to try to understand how we've used those as human beings through time. And still today, everywhere you go, people are talking about a connection to the San Pedro in Peru. It's been described as something that sets you free from matter. And for the Chimu, they would drink it out of a drink that they called Chimora, and during every full moon. It was a full moon thing, because they worshiped the moon. And when their lives changed, for whatever reason, they had to try to figure out how to stop the change, because they needed to try to figure out how to return balance to their world. And just recently, right outside of the walls of Chan Chan, they found the remains of what they think to now be the world's largest child human sacrifice. You can see the skull of a young child that I'm holding. It's actually not a regular shaped skull. It's been modified, as is the tradition in the Amazon, actually, where they've put a metal board on top of this child's head over time and created this shape that might have been more culturally pleasing. But these kids came from all over the place this one moment. They weren't necessarily, well, we don't know if they're brought by force or not, but apparently, based off of what they've been able to study from the bones and from the matter around their bellies, is that they were all eating the same thing for about 3 months before they're led to their death And then there was a systematic killing. There was this incredible knife that was found, this blade that they showed me, where it still has the beads inside it at the end of its rattle, and the rattle signifies the sound of death. And as this archaeologist was showing me the sound of this rattle, you could actually hear the sound, the last sound that those children heard before their chest was cut open and their hearts were ripped out, because you can actually see those systematic cut marks on all 137 skeletons that were found in this one pit, in this one moment. Now, what was that for? Why did they all go to that end? What do we do in the extreme ends of our human nature? It's hard to say, but there's a theory by an anthropologist named Hagen Klaus that it might have had something to do with the changing weather, El Nino events. They couldn't deal with these massive floods that came through. And if anybody's been following the news about Peru right now, just a week after, actually 2 days after I left that lab, massive floods with an El Nino rushed through and caused incredible havoc. I think it killed actually 4 people in neighboring streets of southern Peru. Where can you find evidence for this? 2 days later, we're at 17,200 feet of elevation. That's roughly 5,250 meters, which is a fast jump. My father's friend, Sfero, a climber, would know that you're not supposed to go that high that quickly. It's not a good idea. But up there, high up in those mountains, you see those lines in the glacier? This is the fastest retreating, well, it's one of the fastest retreating glaciers in the world, but it's one of the only tropical glaciers, or a handful of tropical glaciers that still sort of exist. They say it's retreating at a rate of almost 20 meters per year. But with its retreat is a book of knowledge, because within each one of those tiny layers might be a clue about an ancient climate. There's ice coring that's been going on for several years. There's Lonnie Thompson from Ohio State who's been leading these ice core initiatives way up high, up in the Andes, and actually around the world. And, it's hard. This is my colleague and director, Jim, who, upon getting up there, just all of a sudden couldn't take it anymore and had to, really had to breathe the oxygen. As he did that, our mountain guide handed him a bunch of coca leaves, which you're supposed to chew to deal with the altitude. And then he blew 3 times into the wind in every direction these coca leaves, laid out in a pair of 3, as an offering to the Apus, the mountains around him. This is ancient traditional knowledge from his parents and his parents before them and before them and before them. Spoken in words that are spoken by the Inca, the Quechua. But as we're up there, we get little bits of ice, and if you look at the little bubbles, see those little bubbles? Those little teeny bubbles. Those bubbles were trapped there when those layers of ice were formed, and as you go further down those layers, you go further down in time, and that bubble might have not been released for 5,000 years. When you crack it open, it smells fresh, it's nice. But within that is knowledge, information, chemical information that they could use to glean what it was like in that area. And sure enough, right around the time of that massacre, there was these massive El Nino events that would wipe through and possibly wipe out that city. This has been, I would say, an incredible month. But over the last year, it's been even crazier. I've gone all over the world. This is my crew and I on top of a mountain in Jordan, a place called Wadi Rum. Has anybody here been to Wadi Rum? Yeah, it's a enchanting place. It's hard to describe it in any other way. But people have lived there for thousands of years. Bedouin, eventually the Nabateans that would go on and build something like Petra. But the Bedouin, they still live there. And there's a researcher, Mohammed Domian, who, together with a group of GIS scientists from around the world, from Arizona, from Queens College, from others, have been using something they call the Rock Art Sustainability Index, or RASI, to try to start to go and catalog what they're seeing on the walls from their ancient ancestors using a crowdsourced approach, just using simple cell phones everywhere they go because they live out there with the GPS on the cell phone and creating a big catalog of this library written on the rocks, this library of information, traces of human thought, maybe early developments of the alphabet, this Thammutic alphabet, which some of these markers, they still make sounds that are used today, like that little triangle is actually branded on the side of the camels that sat in the camp next to us, and they said it made a sound like an R sound or something like this, but this is stuff from an habitation across a region that dates back 10,000 years or more. And now, today, with cell phones, these Bedouins are running around cataloging where they all are and creating a map of ancient knowledge, crowdsourced out of low-tech devices already in their pockets. These same people would go on to become the Nebateans that would build Petra, amazing Petra. And at first, you see Petra, and you're like, man, that's amazing. It really is. But imagine it when it was there. It was blue and yellow. It was painted in different colors. It was influenced from interactions they had from all around the world. And then what you don't see until you get up on top, which you're not allowed to do unless you're filming there, which is what we've been able to do, is get this crazy access, is that on the top of each of those roofs are these little catchments. It's all catchments. It's all a bunch of pools. The whole thing looks pretty, but actually it's this incredible network of water catchments. And they all feed down into these underground cisterns that still fill with water today. So the whole thing has these channels that run through the sides of it, the faces of this stone wall, and they feed down into these underground pools. And that's how these, in fact, if you look at the whole city of Petra, it's just one huge bowl feeding down into these cisterns in the middle. And it's remarkable. It's beautiful, but it's remarkable as an engineering feat. Incredible. Not so far away, I was in the Rift Valley with Dr. Revital Bookman, a geologist from Hoffa University. And she's looking at these settlements the same way that Lonnie Thompson was looking at the glaciers, using it as a record. But not only a record of what got deposited there, but the geological violence across the region. These deposited layers were created with these flash flood events through the desert. And then you can see those swirling patterns. She calls them Laustrin sediments. And they're related to specific earthquakes that she can then use radiocarbon dating to see where's in the settlements and see when earthquakes happened across the region. And if anybody knows the Rift Valley in Jordan, it's where the tectonic plates are literally ripping themselves apart. Earthquakes. Massive earthquakes. You have the whole thing sitting on this salt diaper. So when you look at the Dead Sea, you actually have these moments where bits of tar, big chunks of tar would float up to the surface at random times because there's tar trapped underneath the Dead Sea. In fact, that's what the Nabateans used to trade a lot of, actually. There was these descriptions of taking like black cows of tar and fishing them out of the Dead Sea back in the day. Imagine that. But also imagine the stories that were generated out of a series of phenomena that you couldn't quite explain thousands of years ago. Imagine how you would come up with explanations for that. Think about where many of the stories that led to the three monotheistic religions today are really originated from. They originated out of one of the most geologically violent places in the world. There's something there, right? Maybe there's some part of that had to do with how we explain the phenomena around us. Not so long after that, I was up in the Arctic Circle with Yad Magnus, looking at 6,000 rock carvings that date from around 500 BC to 420 BC. He uses this process called shoreline dating to figure out how old they are. It's a site called Alta. And what he explained to me here was that they would use the grooves of these stones and the movements and the actual pools that you see around us to create a three-dimensional topographical map that then they would place their existing world on top of. Kind of like he described it as a Google Earth, but from ancient times. You see a bear there, you see reindeer, you see these images. Now at first, you think, well, what is this? Is this a procession, a line? What is that? And then you look a little closer and he describes to me, you see that man up there with the arrow, a bow and arrow, and it's pointing straight up, and it looks like that man right in the middle, the third person over, gets hit with something. Jan's theory is that this is a creationist story where we come from the reindeer, we live our life, we die, and we become reindeer again. You know, that's quite remarkable.
Well, hello, everybody. I just wanted to, first of all, say thank you to Mayor Bloomberg for inviting me and all of you around here to this incredible event. There's, I think, something like, 115 mayors? It's a lot of mayors. 80 million people represented here, and they asked me to come and speak about the cities that, I guess, for the most part, didn't make it. You know, the ones that came and went. I'm a National Geographic Explorer. I've spent the better part of the last, maybe 15 years traveling around the world looking at ancient cities. I'm an engineer. I use tools like this. It's a LiDAR. It's a laser on a drone that shoots billions of laser beams into the trees. And then when we look at the data afterwards, we can actually see both the trees, but we can also delete the trees and see what's underneath them and reveal the hidden past. And then we hike into these jungles and we have our machetes, and I don't have my cool fedora there. I was telling somebody backstage I should have my cool fedora. But we hike into the jungle and we find all these ancient cities and we see what they tell us about ourselves. Now, I've fallen in love with this experience, these chapters of our human history, these versions of our coexistence. And I was asked to come and speak about roughly 10,000 years of human history in 10 minutes. So this is like the Cliff Notes, the abridged version, as somebody pointed out. But these are essentially, I would think of them as chapters. Each one part of the book of who we are, and each one existing in all of us, right? The cities themselves are the manifestation of human imagination. They're the things that define us as a superorganism. And they are very different from one another. And we are on this very long continuum. I'm talking about everything that didn't work up until now, or maybe some of them that did. And then after me, Leslie Loco will be speaking about the imagination of the future. And right now, we're in this weird limbo state called the present. And we're talking about cities. I've always thought about cities as these experiments. You know, they don't always make it. In fact, most of them don't. The first cities that we've really known in our human history, they might not really even be considered cities. They were all really these ritualistic temple sites all over the world. The first big monumental structures in human history were big places to party and experience our connection to the divine and connect with each other and connect with nature. And then they kind of manifested into these other things where we all organize and spend time together. And you're talking about resilience of these cities. And having now spent the better part of my life going and looking at all these ancient cities and seeing what worked and didn't work, there's this question of identity versus adaptability. How do you keep something strongly rooted in who you are, but at the same time change? Well, I've seen many cases where it's not a versus, but an and. And that there's this other part of this, which is about the cities that were able to have a long-term vision versus a short-term vision that allowed them to continue and thrive. But of course, these are very short-term experiments. I mean, we're talking about the last really couple thousand years in the long journey of who we are. So again, this is kind of not a huge data set for us to work with. Whatever we come up with in the future, it's still very much in the unknown. One of the longest continuously inhabited cities that I've ever seen and spent time in is Varanasi, India. Has anybody been here been to Varanasi, India? Yeah, okay. For those of you who have, it's a powerful, trippy place. I mean, it really brings you into a different mental state. The minute you walk into this city or get closer to this city, the smell of all the burning fires surrounds you, the colors of all the buildings, the pastels, they take you into an altered state of consciousness. The city itself, I think of, is a tool to take you into an altered state of consciousness so that you can get into a neuroplastic state that allows you to perform the ritual of letting go of something very important and accepting something new. This is a place where for 3,000 years or more, Hindus have come to burn the dead of their loved ones at the banks of the Ganges to try to get to moksha, this process where you skip reincarnation and go into enlightenment. And I stood right in that little building in the middle of that image, and I was shown a tiny fire that I was told had been burning for 3,000 years continuously, which I don't know if that's true or not, but there was two guys tending to that fire, and they didn't look that old, so I don't know, But it was pretty incredible. It was pretty incredible. This is this question. Does identity, does purpose have a huge role in the longevity of a city? Of course it does. Now, this is a unique case because it's a pilgrimage city, but this city has also faced huge upheavals in politics and climate and economies, and still its roots and its anchor in its identity has helped it last longer than almost any other city on planet Earth. Here's another one, the iconic city of Petra, right? I mean, this place is remarkable. It had a different kind of identity. It was a political zone. It was a trading nexus of the world at one point. They would trade frankincense and asphalt there and other ashfelt, other materials that they were finding in the desert. But this, when I look at this, I think of ourselves as ants. We're a bunch of ants that have built our sandcastles in the hills. And what you don't see from this image is on the top of all those roofs are massive water catchment systems, incredible water catchment systems that all channel down on these facades. There's these tiny little channels that you can't see that run all the way through the city, down through the canyons, and into these cisterns underneath the city. And those cisterns are still filled with water today. This is a city that sees no more than 6 inches of rain a year, and yet somehow thrived. At its time, it had trees and buildings and all kinds of incredible lush ferns. But the economy changed and it didn't make it. It only lasted a couple hundred years. This is one of the most wild places I've ever been. This is in Micronesia. Those are basalt stones. This was built in the time of Genghis Khan, okay? Like, how do they do this? But this is in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And this incredible city faced massive challenges to climate. This is a paper that we just published a couple of weeks ago in the Proceedings of National Academy of Science. And it shows the coral dating of the buildings relate to their processes of growth. And those two big spikes on the bottom there, those are the main phases of growth. And what you see right above it are the variabilities in El Niños. So basically, the city was built in response to El Niños. But when it came down to it, they didn't have enough to make it through the last one because they didn't have resources to find more of those huge stones, and eventually the city was abandoned. This is a story of the impact of El Niño, which is something I've seen across all of human history, and also and how we make long-term plans versus short-term plans. Look at a place like Amsterdam, which actually started being built around the same time as that city in Micronesia. You know, it found its start in the Little Ice Age, and they did a lot of really incredible planning, and they started building out the canal systems, which everybody's very familiar with, and they faced the challenges of a changing climate with foresight that extended beyond the 20-year time frame. They weren't reactionary, and they found ways of looking at resource management that allowed them to continue to build and innovate around this process of resilience. Of course, we're in this other incredible place in Latin America, and this is a city not too far from here. I think this is in a part of Mexico. Probably that might be Calakmul, I think. But this is a giant Maya city. Now, I was told by the mayor of Guatemala recently, just backstage, that there was this incredible anecdote. He said that in Tikal, the big plaza in the middle, all these cities had these incredible major public plazas. You could stand on one pyramid and you could talk to somebody on the other pyramid and hear them as if they were right there. But at the same time, everybody below you couldn't really hear you. It was like having a private connection between two people on top of a pyramid, which, first of all, it's incredible. The Maya they built, they were the centers of innovation, and they were born out of the jungle. I've always found that incredibly fascinating. But what was it that allowed them to be so imaginative? It was a connection to nature, it was a connection to art, astronomy, spirit, all these other things. But that same thing that allowed for all that innovation led to something that was pretty deeply human, which is social and economic disparity. Incredible disparity, right? If you could stand on top of a pyramid and talk to somebody else on the other side of the pyramid in the plaza, it was almost like you were two gods standing above all the people. And in a large realization, all those cities collapsed about at the same time. The Maya were a bunch of city-states that all fought against each other for resources. And at the end of the day, it was wars, and it was an extreme rapid growth. Most of these major cities, like Palenque and others, they were built by single individual lifetimes. They were built by kings and queens that were like, this is my mark on the ground. And they would expand, and then those El Niños would come, and other droughts would come, and they would wipe out these cities because they were not able to be resilient to their resources. Now, 10,000 years of human history, that's harmony. We got to figure out the harmony in 10 minutes, and I'm already over. But our human history has had many major climate events. One of the biggest ones was this 4.2 thousand year ago event called the 4.2 kilo event, and the whole world faced major climate changes. And what you see in the right there is the salt layers of these long droughts that I was able to observe in the Dead Sea of Israel. And what societies made there were big failures, actually. They couldn't face it. The Akkadians, the old kingdom of Egypt, Mesopotamia, they all collapsed following this crazy period of climate change. But there was a few that made it, a few small cities that made it. And those that made it, they had some interesting things about them. There was this city that I was shown outside of Israel called Kabri, where the Canaanites survived and thrived. And in their buildings, they had these huge dining halls with no central seating. There was not like some kingship at the middle. Everybody was kind of equal. And that's over 3,000, equivalent of 3,000 bottles of wine that they had stored in one room alone. So they had big parties there. They had, it was like, the end of the world, bring out the wine. But they also found artifacts from all over the world there. They found artifacts from Cyprus and beyond, and it was about opening borders and creating connectedness. It was about finding a way to work together with places from far away and choosing not to have that extreme social hierarchy. Choosing to see the good in each other and the opportunity to depend on each other. I think of cities like Istanbul and other places like that that have always had these layers of convergence and trade that have made it. Cities are our human experience and our human experiment in our collective existence, right? That's why we get together. We want to be part of something bigger than ourselves. We want to imagine that we can depend on each other, that we can thrive with each other, that we can be inspired by each other. But what is it that allows us cities to maybe thrive and not disappear and become a lost city that I'll search for with my LiDAR? I mean, it's just basic elements of our human condition. It's finding our identity, our purpose, figuring out how to be adaptive, but while still having that root and that anchor, having a vision that lasts more than 20 years and trying to look at the 200-year time frame, the 300-year time frame, because that's what's coming. We're looking at climate change that is coming at us, but it's coming at us in a big way, and we can see it. We can see where it's coming, and we can have long-term vision and not think about things the way that the Micronesian city of Namadol did, but maybe looking at other ways of being more sustainable in our resource management. It's about harmony, okay? Like that's the lesson that I've seen in all these cities. When the resources get tight, when the environment starts to shift, It's how we work together, and the massive changes in hierarchy and social dynamics and social disparity, they ruin that harmony. They make it so these cities have collapsed. But at the end of the day, it's about connectedness. We're one planet. And in the long journey of our human epoch, we've never met a moment like this where we are as interconnected as we've ever been before. And I loved what Mayor Johnson said a couple of speeches ago from Denver. We are innately good in our human nature. That is something that I've seen in our human story. That is something I've seen. So as we face the challenges of tomorrow, we think about our futures of today and tomorrow and the changing climates that we have and all the challenges that we face, I think it's leaning on that good in the human spirit and finding that connectedness that can help us get through it all. So thank you very much, and here's for the future.